Hello, I'm Mark Tucker.
Hey, I'm Alan Furstenberg, and we are Two Voice Devs.
Two voice devs. Alan, my friend.
Mark, my friend, how are you
It's
doing?
I'm doing well. It's an end of another week. Time just keeps marching forward.
Time.
Or spring was it spring forward, fall back? For
You,
for Arizona not celebrating, or participating in daylight savings time, it still affects me because now I have to pretend like I'm in California time for the next whatever 8 months, whatever it is.
whatever, yeah, until November.
So
Assuming they don't like revoke it completely, which is, they always talk about that.
yeah, I'm waiting for that to happen. That would be great. Right now, I'm 2 hours different from my friends and coworkers in New York. That's where you are, Alan.
Mhm.
And that's the way it is typically. And then because of the daylight savings time that just happened, now it's 3 hours difference. And that's always fun because sometimes early meetings get even earlier.
Ooh, oh, that's rough. It's, we last talked about time back in November of 2020.
That's a long time ago.
It was episode 15. Can you believe it was over 100 episodes ago?
It's crazy.
It's been there has been a lot of time since then. It seems like this would, and back then it was we were just leaving daylight saving time. So now we just went on daylight saving time. Or as the Europeans like to call it, summertime. Um, so this seems like a good moment in time to talk about time and voice
Hmm.
and see what's changed since 2020, if anything.
Yeah. Yeah. So there has been some things that have changed, and I think maybe we can even touch on some topics that we didn't cover back in episode 15. Um, so I think kind of like a broad stroke, let's just kind of talk about when you're taking voice input, you can ask for time or set a certain date. You can say today, tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
and that's got to kind of figure out that inside your logic. There's libraries that you can use that would take into consideration for time zone. You might use that for reminders or other things. And we can also touch on some changes that happened with a Jovo plugin that I created
Well,
for time
that's right. That was
during.
it's now Jovo 4, and back then it was Jovo 3, wasn't it?
Yeah. So we can talk about that. And then I think also kind of in that same vein, there's some things with APL that deal with time and time zone. And then we could talk a little bit about SSML,
Yeah.
kind of this say as tag and how it deals with
And
date and time formatting.
since then we have app actions, and they've got their own way that they handle time slots. So yeah, no, I think there's plenty that's changed over the years. So why don't we start by talking about uh, slots
Okay.
and how those work? I guess what they're used for and how they look to the user versus how they look to us as developers.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Okay. So at least on the Alexa side, you've got three different, I would think, um, built-in slot types. There's Amazon date, Amazon duration, and then Amazon time. So just kind of touching on that briefly, Amazon date, the documentation indicates it's in ISO 8601 format, but it will accept things like, you can say, what time is it today? Or you can even like this is built-in stuff with Alexa. You can add a reminder and they're like, well, or and they say, well, when do you want to set the reminder? You can say, today, you can say tomorrow, you can say next week, you can say next Tuesday, you can say a
Mm-hmm.
specific date. So all those types of functionality are things that you can, as a developer, can use and take input in. And so it's going to give you back some sort of a specific, like if you say today or now or tomorrow or a specific date or even next Monday, something that would resolve to a specific date, you're going to get back that date. If you say things like this week or next week or this month, then it might, or even this year, it might give you just like the month, the year portion or the year month portion, or the year with a week, and then which number of week it is. So there's just, there's different formats that you can do. So there's lots of flexibility that you have in identifying a date with voice input.
ISO 8601 has a lot of different formats. So make sure you look at those and look at the Alexa page to see which of the formats it's using for which types of specifications. So for example, if you say something like next year, in some cases it'll just give you a year, and in other cases it gives you a year and then clearly indicates an unknown or an arbitrary month and day. So it doesn't try to say, it's January 1st. It says, this year, and the rest is unknown or ambiguous. So that was kind of interesting. On the Google App Action side, they have similar slots, which are keyed for specific built-in intents. So for example, the built-in intent for making a taxi reservation, which is, the Uber and Lyft intent, lets you give a future date and time. And if the user says those when you're invoking the action, it will fill it in with an ISO 8601 date time as well. It's not clear from the specification, though, how complete that ends up being. So if I said something like tomorrow, does it pick an arbitrary time tomorrow? Does it pick the current time tomorrow? Does it just specify the date? It's not entirely clear what it does. One of the things we talked about a bit back in episode 15 was that Dialogflow and Action Builder handled it a little bit differently. And both of them handled it a little bit weird when it came to dealing with what tomorrow means, because they both dealt with it a little bit weird when knowing what today means, because they didn't have the concept of a time zone. And this is an interesting problem. So if it's and at the time, both of them, at the time, Action Builder always treated things in terms of UTC, Universal Time Coordinated, while Dialogflow lets you specify a time zone for the app, but not for that invocation. So you couldn't change it based on the invocation, but you could say, well, my call center is pretending to be in New York, so I'm going to assume all my calls are New York time.
Right.
But that has an impact when you're talking about what today or tomorrow means, especially if you're in UTC. So if you think of things as UTC, after 8 p.m. US East Coast time, it's tomorrow UTC, but not on the East Coast. So things start getting really confusing. And this is a problem, I think, in general when it comes to time that people don't think about is, when you give a relative time, well, relative to when or what?
Yeah. So refresh my memory on the Google side of things as far as supplying a time zone, because for the longest time, Alexa didn't have a time zone. You have no idea. You couldn't even, get it if you wanted it. And they finally, I felt like it was years and years of me petitioning, but I don't think they listened to me. I think they did it on their own time. But they finally gave an API. So the way that you get the time zone in Alexa is that you have to specifically ask for it and make a separate API call to get it. Whereas I think with Google, then the time zone is something that gets passed along, right?
Oh, with Google, it was far, far more straightforward. You don't get one.
Didn't that change? I thought that
No.
was,
Nope.
oh man.
Well, I mean, it changed now because app actions do have access to the time zone that's on the phone.
Okay. Maybe that's what I was thinking of, is the app actions.
So app actions have it because that's just, your phone has the time zone and it's just an app at that point.
Yeah.
But conversational actions never had access to the time zone and never did.
And never will, because now they're going away, right?
Right. And in the original episode, it's actually interesting. We discussed a couple of ways to work around that problem.
Yeah.
None of which were good, but they all worked around the problem.
Yeah. Wow. It's been a long time since I've thought about that. So yeah, and I as I recall, and not that I've done anything with Bixby for a while, but Bixby I think would just give it to you. So there was like Bixby would just give it to you. Google, you could never have it, and Amazon, you had to make an API call to get it.
Now it's interesting. One of the things that I was pondering as I looked into this for this episode was whether they had added it to some of the personalized information. So Alexa, right. Now, if you have a personalized session, it can do things like greet you by name without letting your name be exposed to the skill itself. These are special SSML tags that are available that are, let the right thing be said on the output, but are not available to your skill itself. So, as part of a greeting, you'd be able to say, "Hello, Mark," and I would just specify that as "Hello, Alexa name tag."
Yeah.
So I went to see if there was a similar tag for morning, evening, afternoon.
Yeah. No.
And there isn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you still have to make an API call just so you could say good morning.
Good morning. Yep. Greet somebody appropriately for the time of day that it is.
Yeah, and that's always frustrating that they considered this PII for some reason.
Yeah.
Or made it absurdly complicated.
So is there anything else we wanted to cover as far as like intents or slots that had to do with date time, or because you started talking about SSML, I was wondering if we wanted to.
Yeah, no, let's go into the SSML at this point.
All right, so on the SSML, there are specific tags that have to do with how you can say things as. Let me see if I can bring up that documentation for that.
There is great documentation for this if you go to
ssml.guru and then take a look at that. So the say as tag itself has an attribute for interpret as, and one of the things could be date, and another one could be time. And then there is a format. In the case of date only, there is a format attribute. And so that is things like MDY for month, day, year, day, month, year, month, day, day, month. So basically, if you have a date in a certain format, then you can just keep it in that format, and then give this format tag onto SSML on the say as, and then it will say it correctly, because I'm not going to say who's correct, but the ordering of month, day, and year is different based on if you're in the United States or most other places.
But as a developer, you should always be using ISO 8601 format.
Yes, you should be. And you should, you definitely want to save your dates in UTC time.
No. I'm going to stop you there, but we'll get back to that one. You should always save your dates in ISO format.
Okay, true.
We'll talk about we'll talk about UTC in a minute.
Yeah, okay, that's true. I'll give that to you. So there's not a lot more that there is that I can say about the say as tag with SSML. There's only, kind of bare bones support for some basic formatting of dates on output.
But it's useful to be able to say them in a consistent way, and SSML provides that for you already. So you don't need to write a lot of code to make sure you tailor it correctly for each locale. Somebody already did that for us. So, if you're giving dates to somebody or times, it's an important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah.
So as for storing dates,
yes,
one of the huge developer issues that we always run into as developers is, well, how do we store this? And somebody will inevitably say either store it as UTC in ISO 8601 and UTC, or store it as Unix epoch time. So number of seconds since January 1st, 1970 at midnight UTC.
Yep.
And many times that is correct, but not always. And the example I love to give is how for years and years and years, the online calendaring systems like Microsoft Outlook Calendar and a bunch of others always would mess up things that were scheduled around daylight saving time. Actually, for years and years and years and years, Windows would always mess up. When you turned it on the day after daylight saving time, it would suddenly go in the wrong direction, or not update, or crash. Has happened more than once. So you don't always want to store things in terms of UTC, especially for things like calendar appointments. I have a standing appointment for us talking, and since we always have it at 5 o'clock Arizona time, no matter whether it's daylight saving time or standard time, it moves around on my calendar and doesn't on yours.
True.
So sometimes it's important to specify what time zone something is in, because the world may shift around that time zone.
Yeah. So I think the important part is that when you're storing dates, especially date times, that you do specify the time zone, and with that, and that could be your typical the ISO format, which could be UTC time, or it could be whatever time zone. But especially if you're going to have a situation where somebody wants to see what time something happened, and they could be in a different time zone, or you want the flexibility of having that in your system. So so that's good to build in from the beginning, is to have a good knowledge of time zones.
I think mostly it's just don't assume that you can that UTC is the best time zone to store things in. Sometimes it's not, but it depends.
Yep.
It really
so definitely give some thought to it.
Yep. So we were talking about presenting time information, and one of the things that's changed since 2020 is we've got APL now. So how does APL handle things like time?
Okay, so so I have a widget. If you have a Echo Show device that supports widgets, then find Show Widgets, and there is a word clock, and it shows kind of a text format with different text highlighted based on what the current time is. And like, how do I do that? And actually, the truth of it is all done in APL. There is really no back-end code that's calculating. I have no, reference to the Moment.js library or Luxon or anything else. I'm just using one of 3 possible values that you can get that's built into APL inside of there's some certain kind of like out of the box built-in things that you can bind to an APL, and one of them is local time. So you have local time, which is going to give you what the current time is right now in local time zone based on the time zone. I'm assuming it knows that based on the time zone setting for your device. You can get it in UTC time. So you could do that. And then the other one is that there's an elapsed time. So when the screen loads an APL, then it will start a counter off at 0 and give you the milliseconds that have transpired since the screen was created. So you could automatically load a screen and then have some sort of like a timer for a game or
That's interesting.
built into that. So yeah, so all I'm using is local time, and it's just giving me the current local time zone, every millisecond it's updating, and just giving me the current value. And because I can bind to that and the value changes, then my binding automatically updates, and I can just refresh the screen based on what the current time is.
Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. I mean, that's one of the things that's straightforward about APL is this notion of data automatically changing on you, and then everything changing based on it. Yeah. So it's good to know that there is, that local time information available to you. That's very useful.
Yeah. So yeah, it's pretty easy to use and just kind of fun to in certain cases have what the time is or elapsed time for things. So that's good.
Now, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say that's all for that. Just going to touch base a little bit more on inside of code. If you're doing something with Jovo, you can use the Jovo time zone plugin. Now there's two different plugins. There's one that's specifically for Jovo 3, and there's another version that's published that's out for version 4. So if you're using version 4, you'll want to make sure that you're using version 4. The functionality is a little bit different. We kind of started from scratch on the Jovo 4 one. So it removed Bixby support because there really isn't any current libraries or supporting of the Bixby platform in Jovo 4 at this time. So we'll wait until that gets added to worry about that. So you can get access to the time zone. Whether it's it's got settings for what to do if it's Google, what to do if it's Alexa, and what to do. Jovo itself has a format for requests that it calls the core platform, or a derivative of that called web platform. So basically, if you're doing your own custom assistant and you're wanting to use Jovo as a backend, sometimes those requests have time zone in them. So like if I were building. Yeah, well, it's there's a place for it. It really depends on who the client is, because it's when you're using a custom, like a core platform for Jovo, as far as the back end, you're writing your whatever front end. It could be a web chatbot, it could be some sort of voice assistant on Android, and so really all your communication from the client back to the Jovo backend is through this request JSON and response JSON.
So it specifies how you can include the time and time zone if you. Okay.
Yeah, and if you do include it, then this time zone plugin just automatically plugs it in for you. And
okay. So great. But you talk about libraries. I think since 2020, there's also been a kind of major change in the JavaScript time handling library world. Back then, Moment.js was the package that everybody used. And now that's been officially deprecated. The Moment.js team deprecated it.
Yeah, so Luxon's a little bit more lightweight. And something else that you're going to need to find is that if you're doing things in TypeScript, there might be a TypeScript specific version of Luxon or some other datetime library that you'll look for. So maybe it's not officially. A lot of things nowadays that are being updated or changed to support both TypeScript and to actually be built in TypeScript, and then that way you can use it for TypeScript and JavaScript. But there might be cases where there might need to be a branch to a library or some sort of a fork that's specifically for TypeScript or something. So make sure you check that out if you're using TypeScript.
And if you've been using Moment.js, Luxon looks shockingly similar. There are a
Right.
lot of similar. There are a couple of major differences, but it still feels the same. If you are still stuck using Moment.js somewhere, take a look at Luxon. It's not going to be a major problem to change between the two. Was there anything else we wanted to cover?
No, I think our time's about up. Let's try to see if we can throw in any additional date, time, puns throughout this. But anyway, no, I think we've got it covered. So
you think we've run out the clock here?
I think we have run out the clock, and I appreciate the time that I get to spend with you, as well as the time that our listeners spend listening to this podcast or contacting us on social media and giving us their feedback. So we really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, if there's if this has helped you, or if there's something else you'd like us to talk about another time, feel free to message us. Social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, comments below. You know where to find us. So we will see you another time on Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Take care, Alan.
Take care, Mark. Time after time.